Hi everyone, this is Abdullah Samir, and this is a follow-up video on adultery, the punishment for adultery in Islam. I got some comments on YouTube mainly regarding some of the points, and on Facebook as well. And I thought, let me make a follow-up video to discuss some of these points which I didn't address in my main video on the punishment for adultery in Islam. So there's a couple of good points people made. One is regarding, how strong are the hadith for stoning. Maybe stoning is meant as a deterrent because it's actually really difficult to implement. The fact that stoning is not in the Quran, but in the Quran mentions something else, lashing. What to do, how to handle a contradiction between the Quran and the hadith. Like the Quran says lashing, the hadith says stoning. Does the punishment fit the crime? How and the last point was, how the idea of having 4 witnesses became 4 oaths by one person. So the first point was, what is the evidence for stoning from the hadith literature? Actually, there's a lot of hadith. There's hadith in Sunan Abu Dawud, Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari, Jami At-Tirmidhi. All of these 4 mention the story of Ma'iz. Ma'iz was stoned for adultery. It's the same story, almost the same story as the one I mentioned in the other video. He was stoned for adultery after bearing witness against himself 4 times that I did it, And this was mentioned. It was mentioned in Abu Dawud specifically that he was an orphan boy. So you can imagine, being an orphan child that grew up, he definitely would have had some issues. Another hadith was the hadith of Unais, where he was ordered to go. Some lady was accused of adultery with one of her workers, and Unais was ordered by Muhammad to go to that lady and ask her if she would confess, and if she confessed, she would be stoned to death. And she confessed and she was stoned to death. This is narrated in Bukhari. And as well, there's another hadith in Bukhari where Muhammad had a Jewish person come to him and ask him, man and woman, ask him what to do about adultery, and he told them to read from the book, and then he ordered, based on the Torah, that they should be stoned to death. Again, this was in Bukhari. So there's quite a few hadith on stoning. It's not just one, and like I said, it's in Sahih Bukhari, it's in Sahih Muslim, it's in Jami At-Tirmidhi, in Abu Dawud. So it's all across the board. There's examples of stoning to death in the seerah, in the hadith, I mean. Stoning as a deterrent. One person mentioned that the reason why it's so difficult to stone someone to death, the rule of 4 witnesses, is because it's meant as a deterrent, and it's not actually meant to be applied. So, because you normally never have 4 witnesses of intercourse. So the question is, how does that work exactly? How does it work that something is a deterrent if you never actually implement it? I mean, deterrents work if they're implemented, not if it's like if you keep telling your kids, if you don't do that, and me and daddy and grandma and grandpa, we all see you eating the cookie, then you don't get any Xbox for 1 week. How would that deter your kids if they know that you and the dad and the mom and grandpa, all of them have to be there? How does that deter anybody? It doesn't if it's never applied. And the other thing is, especially with Ma'iz, who was an orphan boy, isn't it quite possible that some of these people that were bearing witness against themselves had mental issues? Maybe they had untreated depression. Why would they come and say, stone me, when they knew, or I committed adultery, when they knew that the punishment was death? I mean, to me, this is someone that has a death wish. Isn't it possible that, because of Islam, they had severe anxiety about the punishment from God for adultery, and they wanted to be killed because they felt so immensely guilty? Isn't it possible that Islam put such a burden on them? And shouldn't the Prophet, being the example of mercy, told them that this is something that God can forgive you for? You don't need to die. You don't need to sacrifice your blood in order to be forgiven for this sin that you did in a state of error. So it just seems like these people may have had mental issues. And why would you kill someone that has mental issues? It says in the hadith that Prophet Muhammad asked them, "Are you insane?" And they said no. But nobody admits to being insane. Oh yeah, well, I'm insane. No, nobody says that. And it's not necessarily that they were insane. They may have just had some untreated, depression, anxiety, especially anxiety from the, Islam itself, The next thing is, stoning is not in the Quran but in the Hadith. This was another very good point that I wish I would have mentioned. Chapter 24, verse 2 of the Quran says, "The woman or man found guilty of sexual intercourse, zina, lash each of them with 100 lashes, and do not be taken by pity for them in the religion of Allah, if you should believe in Allah and the last day, and let a group of believers witness the punishment." Now, okay, so this is saying now that if someone commits adultery, now the problem is in Arabic there's only one word, zina, which means married or unmarried. It's not like in English you have fornication, which is for unmarried, adultery, which is for married people. The problem is in Arabic there is one word, zina, that's used in the Quran. Now the issue is, what does this mean? Does it mean married or unmarried women? If you just go by the Quran by itself, it's not clear. It's not clear what does it mean. So here's the thing. According to the Sunni methodology, Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the Quran is explained by the Hadith. I mean, what happens is, this is a perfect example. What does it mean, lash them with 100 lashes? Does it mean if they're married or not married? So the Hadith actually gives us context of what did Prophet Muhammad do in this case. Did he lash the married person? Did he lash the unmarried person? And from that context, we understand the Quran, because without the Hadith literature, the Quran loses a lot of context and you don't even know what it means. Some people will try to claim that this is a contradiction, and they'll say, well, the Quran says one thing, the Hadith says another thing. But actually, it's not a contradiction, because the lashing is specifically for unmarried, and the stoning is for married. And in that same Hadith of Unais, the man was lashed because he was not married, but the woman was stoned because she was married. So this is how you can actually resolve the conflict. And if somebody only believes in the Quran, then they would interpret it however they wanted to, I guess. Now the thing is, even if you only believe in the Quran and you don't believe in the Hadith, which means you're not a Sunni Muslim, because Sunni Muslims go by the Sunnah, how does this make sense? Does the punishment fit the crime? Does it make sense to lash someone 100 times? As I mentioned before in my previous video, this type of punishment, this very severe corporal punishment, like, person wouldn't be able to walk after being lashed 100 times. It's a severe punishment. It's not effective. It's not going to bring about change. And for a private moral crime, does it make sense? If Islam wants to, why is it in Islam that these things are fixed, are legislated, to be rigid, when over time, we've learned, societies adapt, people change, and governments can improve on how to help, how to reduce these things. If they want to have a target of reducing adultery, they can do that. There's many ways to do that, and having this type of punishment, I do not believe is effective. Another thing we can look at is the idea of beating your children. Beating your children is something that was common, a long time ago, but we found through hundreds of studies and decades of research that corporal punishment, hitting your kids, is not effective. It doesn't bring about the change that you want, and it just doesn't work. It's just not effective, and it's actually quite detrimental to the kids. So the same way that we've learned and we know now that these things are not effective, we can actually find different ways of disciplining our children. The same thing with the Quran. If it's a book from God, shouldn't it come with values and guidelines, not strict, rigid things that wouldn't make sense and would get outdated? The last point I wanted to make was the story of how 4 witnesses became 4 oaths. So it's interesting. This was highlighted by the Master Arab in one of his videos. In the beginning, the Quran says that if you accuse a woman of adultery and of zina, and you don't have 4 witnesses, you will be lashed. Meaning, if you make an accusation and you don't back it up with 4 witnesses, you will be the one that'll get lashed 80 times. The problem is, what if you saw, your spouse committing adultery, and the man came to the Prophet and said, I know what I saw, okay? I saw with my own eyes what happened, and he wanted to, accuse her of cheating on him, but he couldn't because he would be lashed. So he complained to the Prophet, and then Allah revealed another verse saying, well, if you don't have 4 witnesses, then make an oath, right? 4 times. So it seems that, like, maybe did God think this through properly? That it started off with if you don't have 4 witnesses, you'll be lashed, and then later on it's like, well, actually you can just swear to God that actually you really saw it, and then she will be punished. But then it turns out the wife came and said, no, he's a liar and I actually didn't do it, don't punish me. So then what happened was another verse came that said, in that case, if she swears 4 times, then the punishment will not be coming on her. So it's interesting that, how it changed from having 4 witnesses to, you can swear that she did it, and then she can swear that I didn't do it, and at the end of it, nobody gets punished. He doesn't get punished for making the accusation. She doesn't get punished for committing adultery. Nobody gets punished. Just wanted to get through those few points that were left as comments. Please leave any more comments if you have anything else you'd like to add. Thank you for watching.